Okay, so how do we structure our essays? Of course, we'll start with introduction, like what process is being discussed here. For example, in the first one, natural process is being discussed, whereas in the second one, the process in the manufacture is being discussed, right? And then you'll continue with overview, and your overview should mainly answer these questions. What are the first and last stages? Or how many stages are there? Or both. We will look at it today, like how to do this in later slide. And in body paragraph, if it is about manufacturing, you should answer questions like what is the order of steps? Follow the process order by order. How are they done? And pay attention to this. How are they done? It's passive, so your description should also be passive. Something is done, something, and so on. Or what equipment is used. These questions should be answered. But if you're describing natural processes, then you should simply answer the question, what steps does an animal or natural bodies like sun, moon, and trees, and so on, go through? Like what steps does frog go through until it becomes like mature frog, right? Starting from frog spawn until mature frog, or starting from mating until mature frog, right? Who is ready to mate with them. Okay, but this one is rare. My students told, when my students told when they had this test, it was, if I'm not mistaken, 2018 December last time. And they said they had natural process. After that, I don't remember any candidate telling me they had a natural process there. Maybe somewhere in between, for the dates that my students were not registered, they had it, but I don't remember. Okay, so what you need to do here is really differentiate the type of process, and then develop your content of your essay depending on that. Okay, now let's move to the next one. How do we write an introduction? I illustrated them in this way, like one for manufacturing and below the other for cycles. First of all, if let's say essay question tells you, shows how A is made, you can paraphrase it by saying the graphs below, or I wouldn't recommend you use words like pictures or images. Diagrams or graphs will be better word. Diagram maybe even better word. Diagrams below illustrate the process of making. Instead of how A is made, you can say how the process of making A. If the question says shows the process of making A, you can paraphrase it by stating illustrates how A is manufactured, or instead of how, what can you use?
Produced.
No, I mean
procedure, like procedure. Can we use it or not?
Okay, illustrates the procedure A is manufactured. No. But instead of process, maybe above, maybe possible.
Yes.
Illustrate the procedure of making, maybe possible. But
instead of how, we can use the way, like
the way, right? Illustrates the way A is manufactured.
I thought you were asking just about the general synonyms of it. Like
No, I was referring to how. So illustrates how A is manufactured, or illustrates the way A is manufactured, or even better, illustrates the way in which A is manufactured. You can paraphrase the words manufactured with produced or made, but unless it is something regarding natural processes, I wouldn't say generated is suitable here. Generated is possible for exhaust fumes, electricity, power, for example, but it's difficult to say this process shows how concrete is generated. It will not be suitable for that purpose. Whereas in cycles, you can start introduction by, usually introductions tell you, I mean, essay questions tell you, shows a cycle of something, cycle of frog's life, for example, right? You can paraphrase it by saying illustrates, for example, a diagram below illustrates what steps frog goes through in order to become, or until it becomes a mature frog, or in order to become a mature frog. So this one is clear, right? Well, what about overview statement? In overview statement, when you're discussing process essays of manufacturing, you can say, as I said, the questions were, what are the first and last stages, and how many stages are there? So you can say it in this way. There are like 5, 6, or 7 stages in the process of manufacturing concrete or cement, for example, right? Or producing cement starts with first stage, like crushing limestone and clay, and ends with packaging, for example, right? Or instead of start with or end with, you can use words like commence at. These prepositions are important. Commence comes with at, whereas culminate comes with in. Start with commencing. So cement production commences at crushing limestone and clay and culminates in packaging the ready cement, which will be used for concrete production probably, right?
Yeah.
Or you can use both. There are 5 or 6 or 7 stages which commence at something and culminate in something. This is also possible to use. There are some other like original or let's say creative ways you can approach by paying attention to what products are being used or what equipment is being used. But that is a little bit difficult to do. You can approach it logically, and when we discuss a sample with you today, we'll look at one of these kinds. Whereas for natural processes, overview is not necessary. You may say right after introduction, like the diagram below illustrates what steps a frog goes through until it becomes a mature frog, and then continue with body paragraph. First of all, it needs to find a mate in order to produce frog's bone, right? And out of these frog's bones, for example, small tadpoles emerge. In this way, for example. But in conclusion, you may write something like, once all these steps have been taken, frogs go through the same process or go through the same cycle again and again. This may be short, like final point of natural processes, but they do not require you to write an overview statement. Even if you want to write an overview statement, you can write something like, well, until frog becomes mature, it goes through several stages in life cycle. Or you can count them, say, like 4 or 5 stages in life cycle. That may be appropriate, but I don't think you should write overview statement here because it's not necessary, it's not demanded from you. Okay, what about body paragraph? Body paragraph, we have to look at them separately. First of all, let's look at how do we develop body paragraph in process essays, in manufacturers. First of all, you should not forget to use passive voice. Like, as I said, we do not say workers crash or crush limestone and clay. Instead, we say limestone and clay are crushed. It will be useful to sometimes show purposes of stages. I'm not saying show purpose of all stages. Sometimes 2, 3, up to 4 maybe will be okay, but you don't have to show the purpose of every stage. Why is it necessary? Sometimes candidates write stuff like this. To begin with, the process, limestone and clay are crushed and powder is made. Referring to these, to the first action here. To begin the process, limestone and clay are crushed and powder is made. I would say this is not a bad sentence, but asking yourself why are some steps taking place here? For example, why are they crushing limestone and clay? Will help you produce better sentences. They are crushing limestone and clay in order to produce powder, right? So rather than looking at them as two separate actions, like first they are crushed and powder is made, you can look at them as one action with purpose. Like limestone and clay are crushed in order to make powder. It's obvious here, right? By crushing them, they are making powder. But it will not be logical to say after this, they are mixed in order to be sent to rotating heater. Here, purpose of mixing is not sending them to rotating heater. That's why maybe you can say, having gone through these steps, cement is grinded in order to be prepared for package. Because after grinding, you can see they grind and now they have kind of ash of cement, which can be packed in bags, right? Maybe the purpose of grinding here is to make it easier for packaging. That's why while using purposes, I said here some stages. Show purposes of some stages, not all stages. You should be careful. You should be sure that the purpose you are stating is actually suitable there. Other ways you can say purpose is in order to make, or synonym is so as to make, you probably know that, or so that something can be made, right? Limestone and clay are crushed so that powder can be made, or so that their powder can be made, which is then mixed. This is the second thing you should not forget. And third thing you should not forget is using time linkers. Because this is process, and while you're describing actions, if you put words like that show first stage, middle stages, and final stages, your essay will be better in terms of cohesion and coherence. It will make it easier for reader to follow the process. If you want to show the start of the sentence, you can say something like initially, first of all, to start the process. And let's look how this first sentence, when we put here like lime and clay are crushed, can be improved by adding these two elements, purpose and link. Instead of limestone and clay crushed, much better, much more effective sentence will be initially limestone and clay are crushed in order to make powder. Now this is much more effective sentence. You can say then it is sent into a mixer before being rotated. Then it is mixed before being rotated in heater. For example, using already then afterwards, or following heating, for example, right? Or you can say following grinding, like ground cement is packaged into special bags. Or meanwhile, to show that the same process is like two actions are happening at the same time. For example, let's look at this part, rotating heater. You can say limestone and clay are crushed. Initially, limestone and clay are crushed in order to make powder. Then it is mixed before being sent to rotating heater. Meanwhile, some kind of equipment, I don't know. Meanwhile, special equipment will be used to heat the powder or mixture, as we said, right? Because they are mixed. Now they are mixture. Meanwhile, special equipment heats the mixture. Or meanwhile, mixture is heated with special heating equipment. Here, as you see, rotating heater and heating from the bottom part of that equipment is happening at the same time. So meanwhile is more suitable and more effective when describing that two actions are happening at the same time. And subsequently can also be used to say that the step after this is, or like finally, eventually, at the last stage, or like eventually, having been ground, cement is ready for packaging, you can say here. So we've basically written the cement production part right now. These are the sentences which are really, really, really important. These are three elements that are really important in process essay writing. What about nature process? The same can be observed there, but instead of passive, you use active. Sometimes you may show purposes. If you find them, if you understand them, these purposes can be additional. You may think if I say having mated with another frog, they produce frog spawn, and out of these frog spawns, small tadpoles emerge, for example. You may say this is too short to have 150 words, but you can add some sentences to describe it. For example, once at a later period, the tadpole develops, and it already at this point it already has developed 2 legs, whereas long tail still remains there, for example, right? You can say then, following this stage in life cycle, young frog develops a mature body, having reduced its tail and gaining all 4 legs, for example. You can add something like this, try to describe it, if you think words are not enough or stages are not enough, because your task is to describe, right? And then you can say, following this stage, then like there is a mature frog with handsome hairstyle and awesome claws, ready to mate with anyone, any frog, right? Okay, I'm just kidding. Okay, almost the same is true. You have to use time linkers there too. Sometimes you can show purposes there, like having turned it into a mature frog, frogs start looking for a mate to produce frog spawn, for example. Or mating partner to produce frog spawn, for example. I don't know. You can use purposes there, you can use time linkers there, but refrain yourself from using passive voice in order to describe stages. Refrain means avoid, keep yourself from